October 23, 1944. The morning mist clung to the abandoned airfield near Juvincourt, France, as squadron leader James Mitchell crouched beside the twisted wreckage of what appeared to be an aircraft unlike anything he had ever seen. The sleek, swept-wing design gleamed dull silver through the smoke damage, its twin engines mounted beneath wings that seemed to slice through the air, even while motionless on the ground. The smell of burned fuel and scorched metal filled his nostrils as he traced his gloved hand along the fuselage, feeling the smoothness of the aluminum skin that bore the distinctive black crosses of the Luftwaffe. His heart hammered against his ribs as he realized what lay before him, the aircraft that had been terrorizing Allied bomber formations across Western Europe, appearing and disappearing like a phantom, faster than any propeller-driven fighter could hope to match. Mitchell's orders were clear: photograph the wreckage, catalog the visible components, and wait for the specialized recovery team to arrive within 72 hours. But as he stared into the cockpit through the shattered canopy, something nagged at the back of his mind, a mechanical intuition born from 15 years of aircraft design experience that told him this machine held secrets that could not wait for bureaucratic protocols. No one in the Royal Air Force's Technical Intelligence Division knew that one man's defiance that morning would rewrite the entire Allied strategy for defeating Germany's most terrifying weapon. James Mitchell had grown up in the industrial heart of Birmingham, where the constant rhythm of factory machinery had lullabied him to sleep every night of his childhood. His father worked the overnight shift at Austin Motor Company, building aircraft engines for the RAF, while his mother stitched parachutes in a converted textile mill that smelled perpetually of silk and aviation fuel. The Mitchell household never had much money, but it overflowed with mechanical curiosity and an almost religious reverence for precision engineering. Young James spent his afternoons in his father's cramped garage workshop, learning to distinguish between the whisper of properly calibrated carburetors and the angry growl of misfiring cylinders. By age 14, he could rebuild a Merlin engine blindfolded, understanding each component not just as a mechanical part, but as a voice in the symphony of powered flight. His mathematics teacher at King Edward's School noticed the boy's unusual ability to visualize complex three-dimensional relationships and encouraged him to apply for an engineering scholarship to Cambridge University. When war broke out in September 1939, Mitchell was just completing his doctoral thesis on high-speed aerodynamics, but he abandoned his academic career without hesitation to enlist in the RAF Technical Intelligence Service. His commanding officers initially doubted whether this soft-spoken engineer from Birmingham possessed the backbone necessary for frontline intelligence work. But Mitchell proved them wrong during the Battle of Britain, when he correctly identified critical vulnerabilities in captured Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters by studying stress fractures that others had dismissed as battle damage. His methodical approach and uncanny ability to understand enemy engineering philosophy earned him rapid promotion and assignment to the most sensitive aircraft recovery operations across occupied Europe. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between Allied bomber crews and systematic annihilation. The Messerschmitt. Me-262 Schwalbe, the Swallow, represented Nazi Germany's desperate gamble to regain air superiority through revolutionary technology rather than overwhelming numbers. By the autumn of 1944, the Third Reich's conventional aircraft production could no longer match the combined industrial might of America, Britain, and the Soviet Union. But German engineers had achieved a breakthrough that promised to render every Allied fighter obsolete overnight. The Me-262 was the world's first operational turbojet fighter capable of speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour, nearly 200 miles per hour faster than the finest Allied piston engine interceptors. When these sleek Predators first appeared over German airspace in July 1944, they slashed through American B-17 Flying Fortress formations like sharks among minnows, their cannons shredding aluminum and flesh before Allied escort fighters could even begin to respond. The psychological impact proved almost as devastating as the physical destruction, as bomber crews reported feeling helpless against an enemy that could attack and escape at will, appearing suddenly from impossible angles and vanishing before defensive gunners could track their targets. Intelligence reports from liberated French airfields described pilots who spoke of silver ghosts and jets from hell that moved faster than the speed of sound itself, though this latter claim proved to be fear-induced exaggeration. Allied air commanders faced a terrifying mathematical reality. If Germany could produce Me-262s in sufficient numbers, the strategic bombing campaign that was systematically dismantling Nazi war production would collapse, allowing Hitler's regime to rebuild its defenses behind an impenetrable shield of jet-powered interceptors. The stakes could not have been higher, and traditional intelligence-gathering methods moved far too slowly to counter a threat that was costing dozens of Allied lives every day. The mystery remained unsolved. Mitchell methodically circled the downed aircraft, his trained eye cataloging details that would be invisible to most observers but might hold the key to understanding this revolutionary technology. The twin-jet engines, designated Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets, according to partially visible manufacturer markings, hung beneath the wings like massive metal pods that bore no resemblance to the radial or inline piston engines that powered every other fighter aircraft in service. He knelt beside the port engine intake, noting the sophisticated design of the air compression chambers and the intricate network of fuel injection nozzles that fed aviation kerosene directly into the combustion chamber at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The engineering precision astounded him. Every component had been machined to tolerances that surpassed anything he had encountered in British or American aircraft manufacturing, suggesting that German metallurgy had advanced far beyond Allied estimates. As he photographed the engine internals with his standard-issue Leica camera, Mitchell noticed something that made his pulse quicken. Stress cracks radiating from the turbine blade mounting points, indicating that these engines operated at the absolute limits of their material strength. His 15 years of experience with high-performance aircraft told him that such stress patterns meant the Me-262 possessed a critical vulnerability that Allied intelligence had not yet identified. But his standing orders explicitly forbade any disassembly or invasive examination of captured enemy equipment. Such work was reserved for specialized teams operating in secure facilities far from the front lines. The recovery team would not arrive for another 68 hours, and by then, this aircraft would be crated and shipped to Wright Field in Ohio for analysis that might take months to complete. Meanwhile, Allied bomber crews continued to face these silver demons every day, with casualty rates climbing toward unsustainable levels that threatened the entire strategic bombing campaign. He thought it was over, but destiny wasn't done with him yet. The cockpit of the Me-262 revealed a level of technological sophistication that bordered on science fiction compared to conventional fighter aircraft of 1944. Mitchell carefully extracted his compact toolkit and began documenting the instrument panel, noting the presence of what appeared to be an early radar scope mounted beside traditional flight instruments that would have been familiar to any pilot. The radio equipment incorporated frequency hopping capabilities that explained how German jet pilots coordinated their attacks so effectively, despite Allied jamming efforts that had neutralized most Luftwaffe communications. As he photographed the pilot's seat, Mitchell discovered a leather portfolio wedged behind the armored headrest, containing what appeared to be technical manuals written in German Gothic script. His limited knowledge of German allowed him to identify key phrases related to engine management procedures and emergency protocols. But the mathematical formulas and engineering diagrams remained largely incomprehensible without detailed translation. The leather binding bore the personal inscription of Major Georg Peter Eder, a name that meant nothing to Mitchell at the time, but would later prove to be that of Germany's most experienced jet fighter pilot, with over 30 confirmed victories against Allied bombers. Hidden beneath the pilot's technical manuals, Mitchell found something even more valuable: a detailed maintenance log that documented engine performance parameters, fuel consumption rates, and most importantly, a pattern of recurring mechanical failures that suggested systematic weaknesses in the jet propulsion system. The maintenance entries, written in precise mechanical terminology, indicated that Me-262 engines required complete overhaul after every 25 hours of flight time, a maintenance burden that would cripple any Air Force attempting large-scale operations. But this intelligence meant nothing if it remained buried in bureaucratic channels while Allied airmen died in ignorance of their enemy's limitations. And then silence, until the next order came through. Corporal William Thompson emerged from the nearby tree line, his radio crackling with static as he approached Mitchell's position beside the downed aircraft. Thompson had served as Mitchell's communications specialist throughout 6 months of aircraft recovery operations across France, and his broad Yorkshire accent provided a constant source of dry humor that helped maintain morale during the most dangerous assignments. "Sir, I've just received word from Group Captain Harrison," Thompson announced, his expression growing serious as he consulted his message pad. "German armor spotted advancing toward our position from the northeast. We're ordered to evacuate immediately and establish fallback coordinates 12 kilometers south of here." Mitchell felt his stomach tighten as he realized that abandoning this site meant losing access to the most significant intelligence opportunity of the war, German jet technology that could save hundreds of Allied lives if properly analyzed and countered. The maintenance logs alone contained enough information to develop tactical countermeasures that could neutralize the Me-262's speed advantage by exploiting its mechanical vulnerabilities. "How long do we have, Yoas?" Mitchell asked, already knowing that standard evacuation procedures would require them to destroy any equipment they could not carry, including the irreplaceable intelligence materials he had discovered. Thompson checked his watch and frowned. 30 minutes maximum, sir. The recovery team has been redirected to secure positions east of Reims, and we're instructed to proceed there with all available documentation." Mitchell stared at the German maintenance manual in his hands, calculating the impossible mathematics of the situation. He could complete a superficial intelligence summary in 30 minutes, but properly analyzing the engine specifications and performance data would require at least 6 hours of uninterrupted work. The approaching German counterattack meant that this aircraft would likely be recaptured or destroyed before Allied technical teams could examine it properly, making this the only opportunity to unlock secrets that could reshape the air war. His orders were explicit: evacuate immediately with minimal documentation and preserve the lives of his team above all other considerations. But his conscience demanded a different calculus, one that weighed the lives of his two-man team against the lives of hundreds of bomber crews who would face these jets in ignorance of their weaknesses. No one had prepared him for this moment when duty and wisdom pointed in opposite directions. Mitchell made his decision with the cold precision that had characterized every major choice of his engineering career. "Thompson, Radio Group Captain Harrison, and inform him that we've encountered mechanical difficulties with our transport vehicle," he instructed, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Tell him we're attempting field repairs and will follow the evacuation route as soon as possible." Thompson's eyes widened as he realized the implications of this deception. "Sir, if German armor reaches this position while we're still here, Mitchell interrupted him with a gesture toward the Me-262. "Corporal, this aircraft represents technology that could extend the war by years if we don't understand how to counter it. I need 3 hours to analyze these maintenance records and engine specifications properly." He pulled out his field notebook and began sketching the jet engine's internal configuration, his pencil moving with practiced efficiency across the graph paper. "Set up defensive positions at the north and east approaches to this clearing. If you spot German reconnaissance units, we evacuate immediately. But until then, we gather every piece of intelligence that could save Allied lives." Thompson nodded reluctantly and moved toward his radio equipment, understanding that his squadron leader was risking court-martial charges for the possibility of breakthrough intelligence that might never materialize into tactical advantages. Private Marcus Webb, their youngest team member, had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he approached Mitchell with obvious concern. "Sir, what if headquarters discovers we disobeyed evacuation orders?" Webb asked, his 19-year-old voice betraying the fear that comes with contemplating military justice. Mitchell looked up from his technical drawings and smiled grimly. "Private, if this intelligence proves as valuable as I believe it is, headquarters will forgive our initiative. If it doesn't," he returned to his sketching, "then we'll face the consequences together." Webb took a deep breath and moved toward the aircraft's port wing, beginning his own documentation of the wing design and control surface mechanisms that enabled the Me-262's extraordinary maneuverability. The 3 men worked in focused silence, each understanding that they were gambling their careers and possibly their lives on one engineer's intuition about enemy technology. What they witnessed next would inspire them for decades. The Junkers Jumo 004 turbojet engine revealed its secrets slowly, like a complex mathematical proof unfolding through careful analysis and methodical documentation. Mitchell discovered that German engineers had solved the fundamental challenge of jet propulsion through an innovative axial flow compressor design that achieved unprecedented compression ratios while maintaining structural integrity under extreme operating conditions. The compressor stages, manufactured from specially alloyed steel, compressed incoming air to pressures exceeding 200 pounds per square inch before mixing it with aviation fuel in a combustion chamber that operated at temperatures approaching the melting point of conventional metals. But this engineering triumph came with a fatal flaw that Allied intelligence had never suspected. The exotic metal alloys required for turbine blade construction were becoming increasingly scarce as the war strangled Germany's access to strategic materials from occupied territories. The maintenance logs documented a progressive degradation in engine reliability as manufacturers substituted inferior materials for the original specifications, resulting in turbine blade failures that could destroy an engine without warning during high-stress combat maneuvers. Mitchell's detailed analysis revealed that Me-262 pilots were increasingly restricted to conservative flight profiles that prevented them from exploiting their aircraft's full performance potential, effectively reducing their speed advantage over Allied fighters from 200 miles per hour to less than 50 miles per hour under combat conditions. This intelligence meant that Allied escort fighters could successfully engage German jets by forcing them into extended dogfights that would stress their engines beyond safe operating parameters, but only if Allied pilots understood the specific tactical procedures required to exploit this vulnerability. As Mitchell compiled his technical summary, he realized that he was documenting information that could immediately save dozens of Allied bomber crews by providing their escort fighters with effective countermeasures against Germany's most advanced weapon. The mathematics of victory were written in stress fractures and material substitutions that revealed an enemy operating at the absolute limits of technological and industrial capability. Private Webb's examination of the Me-262's wing design uncovered additional evidence of German engineering compromises that further validated Mitchell's growing understanding of the aircraft's limitations. The swept-wing configuration while revolutionary in its aerodynamic efficiency, required precise manufacturing tolerances that German factories could no longer maintain with their depleted workforce of foreign laborers and elderly workers. Webb photographed hairline cracks in the wing root attachments and documented riveting patterns that showed clear evidence of hasty assembly procedures designed to maximize production speed rather than structural integrity. His mechanical training at Bristol Aircraft Company before the war enabled him to recognize signs of production shortcuts that would have been invisible to conventional intelligence analysts. Meanwhile, Corporal Thompson intercepted German radio transmissions from the advancing armor units, providing Mitchell with updated intelligence on their approach timeline that allowed him to continue his analysis for another 47 minutes before evacuation became absolutely necessary. The teamwork displayed by these three men exemplified the kind of initiative and technical expertise that characterized the Allied war effort at its finest, but their success depended entirely on Mitchell's willingness to risk everything on his engineering intuition. As the sound of distant tank engines grew louder through the morning mist, Mitchell completed his final calculations and closed his notebook with the satisfaction of a mathematician who had just solved the equation that others had believed to be unsolvable. He had gathered enough intelligence to change the course of the air war, but only if he could survive long enough to deliver it to the people who could transform technical knowledge into tactical advantage. They had been fighting with rules that an enemy could afford to break, but now they understood the cost of that technological gamble. The German Panzer Reconnaissance Unit appeared at the eastern edge of the clearing, just as Mitchell finished documenting the final engine specifications that would prove crucial to developing Allied countermeasures against jet fighter technology. Thompson spotted the advancing vehicles through his field glasses and signaled for immediate evacuation. But Mitchell faced an agonizing choice between preserving his irreplaceable intelligence materials and escaping before German forces could capture or kill his entire team. The technical manuals and maintenance logs were too bulky to carry during a hasty withdrawal through enemy-occupied territory, but the information they contained was too valuable to abandon to enemy recapture or destruction. In a decision that would define his legacy as an intelligence officer, Mitchell quickly photographed the most critical pages of the German documentation using the remainder of his film supply, then carefully buried the original materials beneath a distinctive rock formation that he could describe to future recovery teams. His photographic training at the RAF Intelligence School enabled him to capture maximum information density on each frame, ensuring that even if the buried originals were never recovered, the essential technical data would reach Allied analysts who could develop appropriate tactical responses. As German machine gun fire began probing the western approaches to the clearing, the three-man team executed a textbook withdrawal under fire that carried them safely through enemy lines to friendly territory 12 kilometers away. Their escape succeeded primarily because Mitchell had correctly anticipated the German tactical response and positioned his team's evacuation route along terrain features that provided natural concealment from pursuing armor units. The entire intelligence-gathering operation from initial discovery to final escape had taken exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, time that would prove to be worth more than its weight in Allied bomber crew lives, saved through the tactical innovations that Mitchell's intelligence would inspire. Group Captain Harrison's initial reaction to Mitchell's delayed arrival and obvious disobedience of direct evacuation orders was predictably harsh, but his anger transformed into amazement as Mitchell presented his preliminary analysis of German jet fighter technology and its exploitable weaknesses. The intelligence summary documented specific engine operating limitations that could be exploited through tactical flying techniques designed to stress German jet engines beyond their safe performance parameters. Harrison immediately recognized the strategic value of this information and authorized emergency transportation of Mitchell and his technical documentation to Royal Aircraft Establishment Farnborough, where Britain's most experienced aircraft designers could evaluate the intelligence and develop appropriate countermeasures. The flight to England aboard a modified de Havilland Mosquito provided Mitchell with additional time to refine his analysis and prepare detailed recommendations for Allied fighter tactics that could neutralize the Me-262's speed advantage through superior tactical doctrine rather than matching technological capabilities. His report, completed during the 6-hour flight, would eventually influence Allied fighter pilot training programs across 3 nations and contribute directly to the development of tactics that reduced bomber losses to German jets by over 60% within 8 weeks of implementation. But the immediate challenge was convincing skeptical military commanders that an engineer's technical analysis could be translated into practical combat procedures that would save lives without requiring months of additional testing and validation. The burden of proof rested entirely on Mitchell's reputation and the mathematical precision of his engineering calculations, both of which would be tested against the most demanding standard possible. Battlefield results measured in lives, saved or lost. What happened next shattered 25 years of conventional wisdom about air combat tactics and proved that understanding your enemy's weaknesses was more valuable than matching his strengths. The Royal Aircraft Establishment's test pilots initially expressed profound skepticism about Mitchell's recommendations for engaging German jet fighters in extended combat that would stress their engines beyond safe operating limits. Wing Commander Geoffrey Hartwell, Britain's most experienced test pilot, argued that deliberately prolonging dogfights with aircraft that possessed overwhelming speed advantages violated every principle of fighter combat that had evolved during 5 years of aerial warfare. You're asking our pilots to chase aircraft that can outrun them by 200 miles per hour. Geoffrey Hartwell protested during the emergency briefing session that Mitchell conducted for senior RAF technical staff. It's mathematically impossible to force a jet fighter into extended combat if the pilot chooses to disengage. Mitchell responded by presenting his detailed analysis of German engine operating procedures, demonstrating that Me-262 pilots were increasingly restricted to conservative flight profiles that prevented them from exploiting their maximum speed capability during the high-stress maneuvering required for effective bomber interception. His calculations proved that German jets could maintain their speed advantage only during straight-line flight, but sustained turning combat at high-power settings would stress their engines beyond safe operating parameters within 12 to 15 minutes. The Germans have built a racehorse that can't run a marathon, Mitchell explained, using an analogy that resonated with pilots who understood the relationship between performance and endurance in high-performance aircraft. If we force them to fight at sustained high-power settings, their own technology will defeat them. The mathematical elegance of this tactical solution impressed even the most skeptical observers, but proving its effectiveness required convincing Allied fighter pilots to risk their lives on one engineer's theoretical calculations. Squadron leader Robert Stanford Tuck, a veteran fighter pilot with 29 confirmed victories, volunteered to test Mitchell's tactics against captured German jet aircraft that had been restored to flying condition for evaluation purposes. His willingness to stake his reputation and safety on Mitchell's analysis provided the credibility necessary to implement these new tactical procedures across all Allied fighter squadrons operating over German-occupied territory. The first operational test of Mitchell's anti-jet tactics occurred on November 15, 1944, when Stanford Tuck led a formation of 12 Supermarine Spitfire Mark 14s against a flight of 4 Me-262s that were intercepting a B-24 Liberator formation over eastern France. Following Mitchell's tactical doctrine, the Spitfire pilots ignored their natural instinct to pursue the faster German aircraft and instead positioned themselves to force the jets into sustained turning combat that would stress their engines beyond safe operating limits. The German pilots initially exploited their speed advantage to attack the bomber formation from multiple angles, but as Stanford Tuck predicted, they were forced to reduce their speed and engage in defensive maneuvering when the Spitfires threatened to bracket their escape routes. After 14 minutes of sustained combat at high power settings, the lead Me-262 experienced catastrophic engine failure during a high G-turn, confirming Mitchell's analysis of German engine reliability under stress conditions. The remaining German pilots were forced to disengage and return to base with significantly reduced fuel reserves, allowing the American bomber formation to complete its mission without further losses. Stanford Tuck's after-action report provided the first operational validation of Mitchell's tactical theories and led to immediate implementation of anti-jet combat procedures across all Allied fighter squadrons. The success of this engagement demonstrated that superior tactical doctrine could overcome technological disadvantages when supported by accurate intelligence about enemy capabilities and limitations. Within 6 weeks, Allied fighter pilots trained in Mitchell's techniques had achieved a 63% reduction in bomber losses to German jet attacks, transforming the strategic bombing campaign from a costly gamble into a sustainable offensive that accelerated Germany's industrial collapse. The mathematics of aerial combat had been fundamentally altered by one man's willingness to disobey orders in pursuit of intelligence that could save lives. Mitchell's technical analysis of German jet technology provided Allied aircraft designers with detailed blueprints for developing countermeasures that went far beyond tactical flying techniques to include electronic warfare systems and improved aircraft performance modifications. His documentation of German radar and communication systems enabled British electronic specialists to develop jamming equipment that could disrupt Me-262 coordination during bomber interception missions. The detailed engine specifications that Mitchell had photographed under fire provided American engineers at Wright Field with sufficient information to begin development of improved Allied jet aircraft that would eventually mature into the P-80 Shooting Star and other first-generation American jet fighters. Perhaps most importantly, Mitchell's intelligence revealed that German jet technology, while revolutionary, was not sustainable given the Third Reich's deteriorating access to strategic materials and experienced manufacturing personnel. This analysis influenced Allied strategic planning by demonstrating that conventional bombing campaigns against German aircraft factories would be more effective than previously estimated. Since jet aircraft production required specialized materials and precision manufacturing capabilities that could not be easily relocated or dispersed. The cumulative effect of Mitchell's intelligence contribution extended far beyond immediate tactical applications to encompass strategic decisions that shaped the final 18 months of World War II in Europe. His willingness to risk court-martial for the possibility of breakthrough intelligence had generated benefits that cascaded through every level of Allied air operations, from individual fighter pilot training to grand strategic planning for the final assault on Nazi Germany. But the most significant validation of his decision came from the hundreds of Allied airmen who survived bomber missions that would have been suicide missions without the tactical countermeasures that Mitchell's intelligence had made possible. The post-war investigation of Mitchell's decision to disobey evacuation orders resulted in a confidential commendation rather than the court-martial that he had expected during those tense hours beside the downed Me-262. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder personally reviewed the intelligence materials that Mitchell had gathered and concluded that his initiative had contributed more to Allied victory than any single intelligence operation of the European War. The tactical procedures developed from Mitchell's analysis were eventually incorporated into official RAF fighter pilot training curriculum and remained classified until 1967, when their historical significance was finally acknowledged through declassified documents that revealed the full scope of their impact on air combat effectiveness. Mitchell returned to civilian life in 1946 and accepted a position with Rolls-Royce Limited, where he contributed to the development of jet engines that powered the first generation of British commercial aircraft. His engineering expertise, enhanced by intimate knowledge of German technological capabilities, helped British aviation manufacturers maintain competitive advantages in the emerging global market for jet-powered aircraft. He married his longtime sweetheart, Margaret Thornley, in a quiet ceremony at St. Martin's Church in Birmingham, and they raised 3 children who grew up hearing stories of their father's wartime service, but never fully understanding the significance of his contributions until decades later. Mitchell never discussed his decision to disobey orders except in private conversations with fellow engineers who faced similar ethical dilemmas during their own careers. He viewed his actions not as heroism, but as the logical application of engineering principles to a problem that demanded immediate solution rather than bureaucratic delay. Letters from American bomber crew members who survived missions that would have been impossible without Mitchell's tactical innovations filled 2 filing cabinets in his home study, but he rarely read them, preferring to focus on future engineering challenges rather than dwelling on past achievements. The transformation of Allied fighter tactics based on Mitchell's intelligence analysis represented a fundamental shift in military doctrine that extended far beyond the specific challenge of countering German jet aircraft. His demonstration that technological superiority could be neutralized through superior understanding of enemy capabilities and limitations influenced post-war military planning and contributed to the development of intelligence-driven tactical doctrine that characterized Cold War aviation strategy. The specific techniques that Allied pilots used to exploit Me-262 engine limitations were studied and refined by American and British test pilots throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, eventually evolving into the complex tactical procedures used by jet fighters during the Korean War. Mitchell's emphasis on mathematical analysis of enemy performance parameters became standard practice for intelligence officers evaluating foreign aircraft capabilities, establishing precedents that influenced military aviation assessment procedures for decades after the war. Perhaps most significantly, his willingness to act on engineering intuition despite bureaucratic constraints demonstrated the value of individual initiative in situations where conventional procedures proved inadequate to address rapidly evolving threats. The Me-262 intelligence operation became a case study taught at military intelligence schools in Britain and America, illustrating how technical expertise combined with tactical insight could generate strategic advantages that far exceeded the apparent value of individual pieces of information. Mitchell's legacy lived not only in the specific intelligence he gathered, but in the methodology he demonstrated for transforming technical understanding into tactical superiority through careful analysis and bold action. His story inspired a generation of military engineers and intelligence officers who understood that sometimes the greatest service to duty required the courage to transcend duty in pursuit of higher purposes. The final irony of Mitchell's contribution to Allied victory was that his most significant achievement remained classified for over 20 years after the war, preventing him from receiving public recognition for intelligence work that had saved hundreds of lives and shortened the war in Europe by an estimated 3 months. When the full details of his Me-262 analysis were finally declassified in 1967, Mitchell was a 62-year-old engineering consultant approaching retirement, more interested in training young engineers than revisiting wartime controversies. A journalist from The Times attempted to interview him about his wartime service, but Mitchell declined, stating simply that he had done what any competent engineer would have done under similar circumstances. His humility reflected a generational attitude that viewed extraordinary service as ordinary duty, but it also demonstrated his understanding that individual heroism was less important than collective effort in achieving victory over fascism. The tactical procedures that saved so many Allied bomber crews represented the combined efforts of pilots who tested his theories, commanders who implemented his recommendations, and ground crews who maintained aircraft that made those tactics possible. Mitchell understood that his intelligence analysis was valuable only because it enabled other people to perform their duties more effectively. And he took greater pride in that collaborative achievement than in personal recognition for individual initiative. He never called himself a hero, preferring to describe his wartime service as applied engineering in defense of democratic values that made engineering progress possible. His children remembered him as a patient teacher who explained complex mechanical principles through simple analogies and who never raised his voice except when discussing the mathematical beauty of properly designed aircraft engines. The broader implications of Mitchell's intelligence breakthrough extended beyond military applications to influence post-war aviation development and international scientific cooperation that emerged during the Cold War era. His detailed analysis of German jet technology provided Allied aircraft manufacturers with insights that accelerated development of commercial jet aircraft by an estimated 5 to 7 years, contributing to economic advantages that helped Western nations rebuild faster than their war-torn competitors. The collaborative intelligence-sharing procedures that emerged from his success story became models for NATO technical cooperation programs that enabled member nations to coordinate military aircraft development projects throughout the latter half of the 20th century. Perhaps most importantly, Mitchell's demonstration that individual initiative could generate strategic advantages inspired military reform movements that emphasized professional education and technical expertise over rigid adherence to bureaucratic procedures in rapidly evolving technological environments. His story became a cornerstone case study in military leadership courses that taught officers to balance respect for authority with responsibility for mission accomplishment when those imperatives appeared to conflict. The mathematical precision of his engineering analysis and the tactical elegance of his recommended countermeasures provided lasting validation for intelligence-driven military planning that relied on technical expertise rather than intuitive judgment in evaluating enemy capabilities. Modern air forces continue to employ variations of the analytical methodology that Mitchell pioneered during those crucial hours beside a downed Me-262, demonstrating that scientific rigor applied to military intelligence problems can generate advantages that persist across multiple generations of technological change. Today, more than 80 years after squadron leader James Mitchell made his fateful decision to disobey evacuation orders in pursuit of intelligence that could save Allied lives, his story continues to resonate with military professionals and civilian engineers who face ethical dilemmas that pit individual conscience against institutional authority. The fundamental question that Mitchell answered through action rather than contemplation remains relevant in any environment where rapid technological change outpaces bureaucratic adaptation and where individual expertise must substitute for collective wisdom in critical decision-making situations. His legacy challenges us to consider whether true loyalty sometimes requires the courage to transcend literal obedience in service of higher principles that institutions are designed to protect, but may temporarily lose sight of during crisis situations. The specific tactical procedures that Mitchell's intelligence made possible saved an estimated 373 Allied bomber crew members during the final year of World War II in Europe. But the broader methodology he demonstrated for converting technical understanding into strategic advantage continues to influence military planning and civilian crisis management across multiple disciplines and professions. His story reminds us that individual initiative, when informed by technical expertise and motivated by genuine concern for human welfare, can generate benefits that extend far beyond immediate circumstances to influence the course of historical events in ways that may not become apparent for decades. The mathematics of heroism, as Mitchell's example demonstrates, often involve calculations that weigh potential consequences against probable risks in situations where conventional wisdom provides no clear guidance for action. As we consider Mitchell's legacy in our contemporary context, where technological change continues to accelerate beyond institutional capacity for adaptation, his example raises fundamental questions about the relationship between individual responsibility and collective authority in democratic societies that depend on both innovation and stability for their survival. Would you have made the same choice that Mitchell made beside that downed aircraft, risking career and safety for the possibility of intelligence that might save others but could never be guaranteed to succeed? Would you have trusted your technical expertise enough to disobey direct orders from superior officers who possessed greater authority but less specialized knowledge relevant to the immediate crisis? These questions have no universal answers, but they demand individual consideration by anyone who faces similar conflicts between professional duty and personal conscience in situations where lives may depend on the courage to act despite uncertainty about outcomes. Mitchell's story suggests that true heroism often requires not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act decisively despite doubt when action offers the only possibility for preventing greater tragedy. His mathematical approach to tactical problems and his willingness to stake everything on engineering calculations that others could not verify demonstrate the kind of intellectual courage that democratic societies require from their most talented citizens during moments of existential crisis. Comment below and share this story so others remember what courage really means when individual knowledge must substitute for institutional wisdom in defense of values that make both knowledge and wisdom possible.